Okay, we're going to go back into chapter 1 and really go through the different angles you can take on grammar and how it works depending really upon how you look at it. Because this stuff is kind of confusing, and there's a reason why students get confused, and that's mostly based on how they're looking, where they're standing when they're looking at their language and looking at their grammar. So how this approach is going to be organized is with 3 different angles, and each of them has 3 different components within it, okay? So we're going to be doing the units of language, which are words, phrases, and clauses. And I'm going to come back to that. And then the elements of a sentence. This is form, function, and style. And again, I'll come back to that too. And then the levels of speech. And really, these are the levels of writing also. These are nouns and verbs, adjectives and adverbs, and prepositions and conjunctions. I know you've been taught those in the past as isolated items, but I'm going to try to show you how those things are related to each other, not only in this chapter, but throughout the book. So what I want you to start doing really is start seeing grammar and really language as a system of systems. It's a lot of different things working together simultaneously. And sometimes they work very effectively together, but sometimes they create a real mess. You might think of this a lot like computer networks and computers and satellites and cell phones and laptops and all these different things that we have within technology. Sometimes they really enhance each other, but sometimes they run into conflicts, and you really can never understand all aspects of technology. Understanding networking is different than understanding software. And all of these things are just complementing each other and working together, but never can you really understand everything about technology and communication systems and everything. Think of language in much the same way. It's a system of systems, and what I want you to get down is a sense of how to navigate and how to work within language that you're comfortable with. You can never have all of it down, but you can get a sense of knowing what you're doing and work comfortably within it. Okay, so that's what we're going towards. We're not going to get everything down. We're just going to get enough of it down so you can operate within it. And I think a lot of people think there's a right way to approach grammar. I hope after going through dialects you understand there's a lot of danger in thinking about the right ways and wrong ways. You can't really do that. But you can also never think like you have it all down. Okay? So now the first one, I'm going through words and phrases and clauses. This is the first aspect that I want you to understand. These are the units of language, and really they're the units of thought. Where most of your grammar instruction in the past has been misguided, I won't call it wrong, but severely misguided, is that it's focused primarily, if not entirely, on words, words, words. And words do matter, but they're not that important. You don't think word by word. You really don't. And when you're writing your sentences, you think in larger units, and we're going to get to those phrases and clauses most often. So words they're collections of letters, okay? But that's what exists on the page. And this definition of words is very important because it's going to come up again with phrases and clauses. A collection of letters on the page is essentially a word, but it's very important to keep in mind that's not all a word is. A word is also a single unit, something your mind recognizes as meaningful and useful. So words always exist somewhere in between your mind and your ability to comprehend them and the page where the letters are printed, the ink on the page or on the screen or somewhere else. It's always somewhere in between, and we always think of words as being what's on the page, but really they must simultaneously exist in our mind, okay? And really, to get that down, look at things like Fitris, Blar, Vortum, Penk. Those are meaningless. And those are collections of letters, and they look like they could be words. But they're not. Why? Because they don't click in your brain as meaningful or as useful. You can't do anything with them. And if you spoke them or read them, it would be, what? You wouldn't know what to do. So then if you have other words, like believable, believe, and believable is just kind of an expansion of that word, and it means something. You can do something with it. A word like semblance, many people haven't even seen or don't know necessarily what it means, but if you saw it in a sentence, if somebody said there was a semblance of order, you would find it meaningful. It just means a sense of order. But even this word, like honor, I can't even pronounce it. This was a word out of Shakespeare. And it's out of, I think, Love, Labour's Lost. It just means somebody who's able to be honored. And if you read that in Shakespeare, you would be able to make sense out of it. Somebody who's, able and willing to receive honors. It's something you can use. Shakespeare's having a little bit of fun because all this right here is kind of goofy at the end. But you can get a sense of it from what came before it, that this is meaningful. So, and again, it exists. Words exist, really, somewhere between the page and in your mind. They're not entirely on the page, or else blar would be a word. It's not. I just made it up. But it doesn't click. It doesn't work with your mind. It doesn't work with anybody's mind. If it does, then you're messed up. I'm assuming you guys aren't messed up. No matter. Spaces are a little bit funky. Spaces in between words, and I put a little note on that in the book. It's important to know that they are arbitrary. They for the longest time in language, we didn't even have spaces. Greek and Latin was written without spaces in between the words for a number of centuries, and then they were introduced. So they're arbitrary. They are useful for reading, but they are not necessary. If you're a real expert reader, you can read things without spaces, by the way. So just to know that. So, and those things just mark off word by word by word. But understand that you don't really obey the words. You don't obey the spaces. Your brain consumes things in larger units usually. The spaces aren't that important. They just help you read. And so they exist on the page, but not necessarily in your mind. So phrases are the first thing I want you to get down. These are collections of words on the page. They are not demarcated on the page. In other words, we don't put one space between a word and two between a phrase. They work as a single unit in your mind. Okay, so they're collections of words that cooperate with each other. Much like the letters within a word cooperate with each other to be meaningful in your mind. And I know this is a little tricky to get, but I think most of you kind of get it. And you can get it by looking at some not phrases. To know what something is, it's often important to look at what something isn't. If I looked at a phrase like with, under, got, that doesn't mean anything. In fact, my mouse won't even highlight it. So with, under, got, duh, I don't know, that kind of hurt. Friends selling my, again, nothing clicked in your mind. I hope it didn't. Mind to lift not, again, all of these are collections of words, but they're all meaningless. You can't do anything with them. But notice if I get some phrases with yellow scaffolding, suddenly your brain clicks with that. Baking 3 muffins. Suddenly, and again, none of these are sentences. I don't want you to confuse these with sentences, but your brain clicks with these. To sleep on the couch. That suddenly clicks. Okay. The first one, by the way, I don't need you to remember this yet. It's a prepositional phrase. The second one is what's called a gerund phrase. The third one is what's called an infinitive phrase. These are all meaningful units. They click within your English brain. And again, keep in mind that English has formed your brain as much as you have taken part in English. It actually creates structures within your brain and tells you, hey, this stuff is meaningful. And so your brain makes meaning out of these types of phrases. Whether or not you knew with yellow scaffolding was a prepositional phrase doesn't matter. Your brain knew it was without you being consciously aware of it. Baking 3 muffins. To sleep on the couch. All of these kind of click within your brain. So they're not readily apparent on the page. There's nothing apparent on the page and the difference between with yellow scaffolding and with undergot. But your brain makes the distinction. It clicks. It clicks in your mind. So we don't make this distinction on the page. And that's why most English teachers don't teach it to students. Because it's happening in your brain, and English teachers aren't allowed to cut your brain open in class anymore. I don't know why, back in my day. But anyway, it's happening in your head. It's not necessarily apparent on the page, but it's there. These are meaningful collections of words, okay? So now clauses are the last level, the last unit of language that we need to know. And these are subjects and verbs that work together. And they're on the page. They're readily apparent on the page. And they click in your mind. Now, something that's distinct, they're a little bit troubling about clauses. You don't always have the subject and verb necessarily together. You can embed things in the middle between your subjects and verbs, but they will continue to have a long-distance relationship. Even if you have the subject at the beginning of the sentence and the verb somewhere in the middle, and you stuff things in between, they continue to have a relationship. They're kind of like husband and wife. Even when one goes off to work, they still have a relationship, even though there's space in between. So clauses are a little unique. Phrases always stick together, and obviously words do. You can't put another, phrase inside of a word. You can stuff phrases in between subjects and verbs. So they're a little bit tricky, but they still work together. They still have a relationship. They still create a unit. And once again, let's do some not clauses. These are often called subject and verb disagreements. I just call them not clauses. John Boy sing, you can hear that in your mind, it just goes wrong. It doesn't work. And look at the next one. Ice cubes of Johnny melts. So this is a common disagreement between the subject and verb, by the way. This is the subject. By the way, Johnny Boy would be the subject and sing would be the verb, but they don't click in your mind because there's a subject and verb disagreement. Ice cubes would be the subject here, and melts would be the verb, but ice cubes melts doesn't click because that's a plural subject and a singular verb. Of Johnny messed it up, kind of creates the confusion here. So that's not a clause. Ice cubes of Johnny melts doesn't work, and your brain should tell you. On this one, it's also Susanna is. This is actually a subject and a verb, but it's a distinct type of one that's called a linking verb, and it's should have what's called a complement at the end. We're going to come back to that, okay? So that should trouble you as being somewhat off. Something's missing. So it's a not clause. It doesn't quite work yet. And again, we'll come back to that in chapter 3 especially. That's what's called a linking clause that's incomplete. So here's some clauses that work. Biafra sings. Dead Kennedy fans know what I'm talking about. Those things click. Biafra sings. Ice cream from grocery stores melts. That's a singular subject with a singular verb. That S actually makes it singular. That creates a little confusion for some people who look too close. But that should click in your brain. Even if this prepositional phrase is plural, grocery stores, the ice cream is singular. The verb clicks with it. Dougie feels happy is actually a linking clause. Dougie feels, he doesn't touch anything. I'm just describing his state of being. He needs that complement, happy. That clicks. Dougie feels happy. That makes sense. Okay? So clauses click. Now, these are a little more challenging to understand at first, but trust me, you do have a sense of this. So use your sense. I'm going to come back to this concept of a shit detector. It's your inner sense of what works as a clause. And there should be what I'm going to call a cognitive click. And you know, hey, that works. Okay? That makes sense. John Boy sing should just not work. Biafra sings should click. And it should happen. So that tells you Words, phrases, clauses are the basic units of language, and they exist on the page and simultaneously in your mind. They must work in both places to actually be a unit of language. It's hovering somewhere in between. Okay? Now the next level, let's go there. And please keep in mind, we'll keep coming back to all three of these basic angles on language. Form, function, and style. Okay? This is an area where you've been taught these. Okay? You've been taught form and you've been taught function. You do have a sense of style. What most students what I've seen with most students coming from high school is they get them confused. They overlap. It's very important to understand that these two things overlap. They are different perspectives on a sentence. Form functions differently in different sentences. This is a noun can be a subject, but a noun can also function, so it can function as a subject or it can function as an object. So bury is a noun. Hit is a verb. The ball is a noun. Okay? Noun, verb, noun. Noun at the end here. But bury functions as the subject. Hit functions as the verb. The ball functions as the object. And here are the exact same words and the exact same parts of speech. The ball is the noun, hit is the verb, and bury is a noun. Okay? None of them have changed their form, but they've all changed function except for hit. And you can, if you don't understand it, just ask Barry, because he's not so happy anymore. So the ball is now functioning as a subject. It's still a noun. Hit is a verb, and it's functioning as a verb. Okay? Bury is a noun, but now he's functioning as the object. That's the distinction. So both of them are always going on simultaneously. It just depends on if you're looking at it from a form level or a function level. So that creates confusion. I'm going to start clarifying that with chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 does form. Chapter 3 does function. Okay? Once you put chapter 2 and 3 together, boy, oh boy, it starts to make sense. It really does. Okay? So expect everything to be a little confusing until around the 12th week, and then it starts to click for students, this form function thing, and it will start to make sense. So be patient with yourself as you get through chapter 2 and 3. Okay? So they're different angles on the same sentence. Okay? Depending on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at subjects and verbs, subjects, verbs, objects, you're looking from function angle. Okay? So style is the effect. You get to create your own style, but you don't get to control how people respond to it. You have to be aware that people are going to respond to how you put your sentences together. They are. Okay? The same way they respond, and everybody knows this. Everybody knows that the way you dress affects the way people respond to you. They'll treat you differently if you wear a dress or if you wear a suit or if you wear, cut-off jeans and flip-flops. People treat you differently. So you can't entirely control how they are, but you can have an enormous influence on it. And you can see, if somebody says to you, if this is the way things must be, then let them be as they have been, and pass as all things have been, have before, and will ever pass again. What the heck? Somebody there is being verbose, and that's going to probably be the response of them. Or if you just say, bye, that's straight to the point and everything else. So different effects on people. So form, that's the parts of speech, and I'm going to refer to this as what things are. Okay? So words, and this is a very important thing to understand. Words, phrases, and clauses can be single parts of speech. And you're going to see how this is a system of systems. You can have a single word functioning as the subject, like I did with Barry hits the ball. But you can have a phrase function as the subject, depending on how you want to organize the sentence and organize your understanding of it. You can have a phrase functioning as the verb. I'm not going to show you this yet, but you can actually have a clause, a whole subject and verb, functioning as the subject of a sentence. You can do that. It's kind of weird, but you can do it. But if you look at this sentence, The yellow jersey was worn for 3 days. Now, the yellow jersey in your head is really one thing. That's a noun phrase. You don't think of this as 3 separate words in your brain. If you do, you got a weird brain, and that's okay. But most of you probably don't. You probably think of the yellow jersey as a single item. That's a noun phrase functioning as the subject. Okay? So it's a noun, really. It's a noun phrase, and it's really a noun, but what is it doing? It's functioning as a subject. Was worn is a verb phrase. That's what it is, and it's really a verb. That whole phrase is a verb in your head. So for 3 days, that's a preposition, that's an adjective, that's a noun. But really what they're doing, and really what they are, they're an adverb. So understand that form is parts of speech, that parts of speech are not necessarily single words, and that's the real shift I want you to be able to make from your high school English classes. Single words are not the only parts of speech. Whole phrases are. Usually we're going to be talking about whole phrases, and but also clauses. We really will be. But the big shift for folks to really get their head around is that you create nouns out of whole phrases. You create verbs out of whole phrases. You create adjectives and adverbs out of whole phrases. I mean, just looking at for 3 days, not one of those is an adverb, but once you put them together, they are an adverb. Preposition, adjective, noun put together become an adverb quite often. Okay? So function is what something does in a sentence when you make it go, once you spin it and let go of it. That's the behavior in a sentence, what something does. Words, phrases, and clauses do things in sentences. Again, you're going to see this is the system within the system. That's what it is. And so I know you might feel a little bit lost right now, but words, phrases, and clauses have functions. They also have forms. So you always have to be able to do that and be able to switch between them and understand how each are simultaneously working. If I had a sentence like cooking an egg should take about 3 minutes, this is cooking an egg is what's called a gerund phrase, and gerund phrases are essentially nouns. That's what it is. It's the process of cooking an egg. I'm not talking about an action of cooking. I'm talking about an activity. Nobody here is cooking. I'm talking about the activity, and that cooking an egg is a noun. It's an activity, like throwing a ball, catching a frisbee, giving a speech. These are all activities. And that is actually functioning as the subject. That should take. That's your verb. That's a verb phrase that is simultaneously functioning as a verb. So it is a verb and it functions as a verb simultaneously. About 3 minutes is your prepositional phrase. And that is both adverb in form and adverb in function. Okay? So that's what you have to be able to see. Those words, phrases, clauses take part in form and function. That's what it is. They're the units within form and function. So, and again, that whole idea of systems within systems. Your phone is simultaneously a phone, but a computer and a calculator, and it's actually part of the system with satellites and other things. So it's all these things simultaneously. You can be both a singular person named Dougie, but you could be somebody's uncle and somebody's husband and somebody's son and somebody's father. You can be all those things simultaneously. Style in the end is the effect of your grammatical choices on the reader. That's what it is. You have a lot of say in it, but it's not entirely up to you. You make the decisions, but you have to be aware you're going to have responses from people that you're not entirely control over. It exists somewhere in between you and your reader. Somewhere in between. You make an impression. Once again, I like to always use the analogy of how you dress. You know the way you dress affects people. You know that. But you can't always control how people respond to you. So, and how I go through this book is that I assume everybody wants to come across as competent, you want to write clear, and you want to demonstrate that you're educated and that you know what you're doing. What you don't want to do is come across as immature, verbose, or confused. Now, when a lot of people use, the kind of language we use in text messages or in Snapchat, Facebook, if you use that type of language in a professional setting, you will come across as immature. But what I don't want to show people, and if you want to do it, you go right ahead, but you have to be aware it's going to make that impression on people. Okay? If you use text messaging style in your professional writing or in your academic writing, you're going to come across as immature and not being respectful very often. Okay? Usually. But what I don't want you to do, and what I assume you don't want to do, is go to the other extreme. I'm not going to show you how to use big words and come across as being fancy pants and everything else. That's also not useful. Okay? That, in fact, detracts from what you're trying to get across in your writing, usually. Not always. Some readers might like big fancy words and big fancy convoluted phrasings. I wouldn't want to write for them, but I don't know. So let's forget about those folks. And you want to be clear, about it. Really, in the end, what this book is doing is trying to allow you to communicate without having your writing get in the way. So the subject matter you're communicating comes across rather than, your abilities or inabilities to write well. Instead, you want to just get the information across with you interfering as little as possible. So the writing isn't going to interfere. It instead is going to be functional. That's what I'm assuming with this book is what you want to do. Okay? So that's what we're working towards. If you want to do otherwise, then go do otherwise. But I don't want to do it. So, okay. So 3 levels of form. This is the last angle that you need to be aware of as we go through this. And again, keep coming back to that system within systems. Okay? This is the last system within the systems I'm going to be teaching you. And again, these overlap, they get confused, but I want you to understand you're stepping on one and then stepping on another, and that's okay, okay? You're going to be switching around. So, but this one's kind of funky. This is one I've worked out recently from working with a lot of student brains. And then I suddenly realized that nouns and verbs work together. They almost never function independently of each other. So this is the stuff of thought. You can't think without nouns and verbs. This is the core of what you're doing with your brain in language. It's noun and verbing. That's what you're doing. And then I figured, oh my God, this is actually essential for clauses. Nouns and verbs are. You cannot create clauses without nouns and verbs. And so these are the core, and what you're going to see as we go through the writing process. Most of your early writing involves primarily the nouns and verbs that you need to get your ideas across. And you're probably writing your Antigone essay, and you're thinking about what Antigone and Creon and Ismene and Haman are doing, not doing, and how they are. That's what you're doing. You're nouning and verbing all over the place. But then the next level, adjectives and adverbs. These things add detail to nouns and verbs. You cannot have adjectives and adverbs without nouns and verbs. But remember what I told you about words, phrases, and clauses. In most good writing, your adjectives and adverbs are actually prepositional phrases. They can be clauses too. You can use, dependent clauses as an adjective or an adverb. You can. But the big thing to keep in mind that these things provide detail for writing, and they're essential for precision. Now, in speech, we don't use a lot of prepositional phrases, and we don't use a lot of detail. Because when we're speaking to somebody, they usually understand the details, and they could ask questions when they don't. When we're writing, however, and this is very important, think back to one of the characteristics of standard written English. It is a detailed and precise manner of communicating. And nobody reads your writing unless they really don't understand some concept, some thing, some idea, some process, some situation. You need to give them details about the nouns and verbs. That's what you need to do. So understand that in their middle draft stages of your writing, that's mostly what you're going to be doing. Not entirely, but mostly. That's going to be your primary focus, is to give detail and to give more precision. You don't need to necessarily add more sentences in your middle draft stages. What you need to do, and we're going to come back to this, is add more detail to what you've already started with. So the emphasis in the middle draft stages is adding more adjectives and adverbs, adding more words, phrases, and clauses that give that detail and give that essential precision. That's where your writing becomes your writing. Okay? So understand adjectives and adverbs add to the nouns and verbs. Now the last level is prepositions and conjunctions. These are funky because they're meaningless. They are mostly meaningless, not entirely, but mostly. You can't define of, and I'm betting you can't define or. When anybody tries to define those types of words, they usually tell you what the words do rather than what they mean. So what these do is allow you to organize everything else. They allow you to stick things together, break them apart, move them around, and make them sound clear and elegant and precise and all that stuff. When you've got a handle on prepositions and conjunctions, boy, can you write well. When you see elegant writing, and I mean effective, not fancy pants writing. You know, again, that fancy writing is usually dependent upon big words that don't really work well. Good writing, in the end, what it does is it sounds graceful. It works. It doesn't call attention to itself. It just works well and flows well. That's usually somebody who knows how to use the prepositions and conjunctions to connect and relate those nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs to each other. They can put it all together well. Okay? So in the end, and again, and just going back to that dressing analogy, somebody can put stuff together well even if they don't have a lot of money. But if they know how to put everything together, they can have good writing and good writing style and effective communication. That's how I want you to think about these three levels. They're all simultaneously working within your writing. Okay, and this is essential to understanding your writing because these things are emphasized. They're never entirely independent of each other. But in your early draft stages, it's about nouns and verbs. In your middle draft stages, it's about the adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, and conjunctions and how you work with them. Okay? So last little word on your sense of language. And I want to just really drill this into you. Ernest Hemingway is the one who said the most essential gift for a good writer is a built-in shock-proof shit detector. That is at the core of this book. And that this is something you bring to the class. And it's always, I want you to always keep your sense of writing and your sense of language and what works and what doesn't. Everything we learn about grammar is always going to be built upon what you bring to the class. And you always already have a sense of what works grammatically correct and what, works style-wise. And I want that to always remain. No matter what you learn about grammar, don't let it go against what your sense of language is. So knowing grammar is always secondary to that sense of language. And I'll come back to this again and again. I want you to always fall back on that. If you think it works well, it probably does. Okay? All right. So take care, folks. I will have the last video on the exercises and walk you through those. Okay? Last one will be the exercises. Take care.